Namaste, dear friends, and a very warm welcome back to this course on Introduction to Indian Psychology. It's our 6th week, and I sincerely hope that you've become more familiar with the terminologies and concepts that have been introduced to you on this course. More so, I hope that you are beginning to learn the terminologies and also recognizing the fact that they may vary across different schools and different contexts. In our previous week, we looked at the context in which human life has been conceived, namely the Purusharthas, the goals of life, and the Chaturashrama, the stages of life, and we mapped them with each other to understand how they are interconnected. Then we looked at the concept of the two natures which are connected to the virtues and vices, the Daivi Sampat and the Asuri Sampat, and how they have to be related and integrated in our lives. After that, we looked at the concepts of karma, because now we are moving into action, from being into movement, into becoming. So how do we then relate our actions? What are the kinds of actions we need to do? How is it connected to our past actions, future possibilities, etc.? In that context, we understood the importance of Viveka Buddhi. How do you act with an intelligence that knows the right thing to do? Alongside that, we also looked at the concepts of the actions that we must perform, the yajnas, the pancha yajnas, associated with the 5 deaths that we have, the pancha rinas, because we have inherited a lot of things. We are part of an entire ecosystem. So how do we not just become thieves and borrow from that, but also give back to that? So these were all very important ideas that we introduced to you. But one of the key points that came out was the importance of the Viveka Buddhi, or the right intelligence. So this week is going to be dedicated to understanding the concepts of the mind, and literally going from mind to mind plus plus. That's a term that I had mentioned earlier, was at one point shared by Professor Parthapatim Chakraborty. We were just discussing things. So I thought it was an interesting one to include in this understanding of the layering of consciousness, and that being very unique to the Indian context as well. So where we've got the mind and we've got different layers beyond the mind that we're referring to as mind plus and then mind plus plus. We'll have a greater understanding of that as we proceed. But I thought that before we go ahead with understanding the different concepts of mind, I'd like to start with a complete revision of what we have looked at so far within the Indic framework of psychology. So today's lecture is going to be a revision of the concepts and context of human life. So we'll try and again collect our ideas around the concept of the human being. And then following that, we'll look at the aspects of human becoming, which means the context of life and action. We'll also understand what the 4-fold qualifications mean, or the sadhana chatushtayam, for someone who's trying to make that journey from the little self to the big self in the best way possible. And as always, we have exercise, glossary and references and some food for thought for you. So who is the human being? Now, I thought before I go into telling you the whole thing, let's try and do it together. So what's the fundamental question that we ask in Indian psychology? Yes. Who am I? This is at the heart of the problem. Now, who was the character who had asked this question and then gone and done some meditation? Excellent. So that was Vrigu. And where did he do it? In the Taittiriya Upanishad. So in the Taittiriya Upanishad, he went and asked his father, Varuna, that, I've heard so much about this Brahman. What exactly is Brahman, and who really am I in that context? One thing that I must tell you, that when you read the Upanishads, everything is not explicitly said there. One has to infer from a lot of the story about what could have happened, what might have happened. So we have a lot of filler dialogues also in there that you must allow us or indulge us with. So here we see that when Bhrigu went and meditated. So I'll just show him meditating here. So he's meditating. And as he meditated, the first question that came to his mind as he sat down there was, who really am I? So then he meditated and said that, oh, I am the Anna, or I am the physical sheath. Then he meditated furthermore, and then he arrived at the fact that no, I have a little more, and we see that this is a little more perforated in terms of its line. So this is the prana. I am the energy, the vital energy sheath. He meditated some more and then he came up with, yes, all of you now are experts in this understanding of the Panchakosha. So he came up with another one, which he said was the Manomaya. So that is the Manomaya. And this is what we would call the mind sheath. All right. Next, he meditated some more and he realized that, okay, while there are, of course, things that are part of my system, but there are also other aspects of me, the intellect, the higher intelligence, which is the Vijnana. So the Vijnana is what I will refer to as the mind plus. And then we have, finally, when his father says, no, you're almost there, go and think some more. He goes and meditates and he realizes actually that he is that Ananda, he's the bliss, and he doesn't come back because he knows now the answer for himself. All right. And this is what I will refer to as mind plus plus. And in different systems, you can understand the associated term. So this was his realization. Now, what was this? How does this connect to the idea of the Vedantic principle of the relationship of the self with the bigger self? So largely we see that there are these two selves, the small self that he started out with, the materialized gross body self, all the way up to the Anandamaya. So when we talk of the Anandamaya from a quantum lens, we see that it is that infinite potential of who we are essentially, and what are the characteristics of their excellence. So Ananda actually has three other words associated with it. So there is Sat and there is Chit. Okay, so there is existence and consciousness that is embedded in that. So what was the Vedantic perspective? So the Vedantic perspective starts here. So it starts at the fact that we are this Brahman. Because when you wear that quantum lens and you look at the world, you see that everything is infinitely expanding. There's an infinite expansion, and which is exactly what the word Brahman means. It comes from the root br. Br, which means to expand infinitely. So he had that experience as a Brahman. So the Vedanta talks of the fact that this is the only reality. So this is the Vedantic perspective that says that this is the only reality, and our downfall or our connecting to the limited aspects of our life is because of avidya. Okay, so it says that we become everything else because of avidya. So I'll just put a cross here to say avidya here to indicate that it is the reason for our limitation. Now, what is the other idea that we have here? We have the other point of view of the Sankhya. So what is Sankhya telling us? Do you remember? What is the starting line of Sankhya? So Sankhya says basically there are two realities. On one side there is the Purusha. So there are a lot of similarities with the Vedantic idea of the Brahman, except that Brahman is one and Purushas are multiple. There is one Purusha consciousness, but there are multiple Purushas. Prakriti, on the other hand, is singular, as you remember here. Okay, so Purusha and Prakriti. So Prakriti can be put here, and we see that all of this is connected to the entire spectrum of consciousness. So there's Prakriti here, and so we have Purusha and Prakriti. So these two are connected, and they're linked in a sense. And this we see is the entire spectrum of consciousness that is possible. And within that, up to here, we have the individual self. Okay, so it's more the individual, the small s, individual, small s, which is also known as the jiva. And on the other side, we start, and this is the lower half. You remember in the Vedas, they talked of the aparardha, the lower hemisphere of the worlds. And on the other side, we had the as we go upward, we have the parardha. This is moving towards a greater self, and this is the parardha. And Prakriti is directly connected to the phenomenon of this existence, of this manifestation that takes place. So Prakriti's action starts from Vijnana onwards. All right, so Vijnana, Mana, Prana, because it comes from Mahat, Ahankara and all of that. And one thing that was fascinating to think is that if you visualize yourself as this quantum being, all right, so you are existing everywhere. You're in this quantum self of infinite expansion. And now you imagine that you are zooming out again. So as you zoom in, you get into this infinite nature of your own reality, of your own material reality, but as it gets subtler and subtler. And then as you withdraw, like they say, the spider withdraws itself. So as you withdraw from the extension into your physical being, what you find is there is a point at which your individuation starts. And in the Sankhya philosophy, when they talk of the Purusha and Prakriti, these are cosmic forces. Mahat is the potential of that individuation, which means it's this movement towards manifestation. And then there is a point when the individuation starts happening. And that is the process of ahankara, where the individual nature starts getting formed. And then from ahankara, then as we get into the grosser manifestations, we have the mind, then because it's also getting connected with the vibratory patterns of the different gunas. And I'll try and show you that in the next plane. So what we see here is that the prakriti is getting entangled within the different vibratory patterns and becoming the different stages of consciousness. All right. So I will also try and show you that perhaps parallelly right now. So if you look at the physical being, we are at the level from a vibratory perspective, we have vibrations. They're dense vibrations. All right. Next, at the emotional level, also there are vibrations, but they're a little less dense. Then at the level of the mind, vibrations again, but a little less dense. And then there is the parardha aspect of it, which is the Vijnana and the Anandamaya. And we see that this is common across all the types. Okay. So our vibratory pattern can either be like this, or on another end, if you look at it, the vibratory pattern is... So the physical vibration, how would such a person feel physically? How would such a person feel emotionally? How would such a person feel mentally? What do you think? Versus this one. So this is what is a very, very entangled and meshed pattern that we have already looked at, and this corresponds to the tamoguna, okay, or the tamas, where it is extremely dark. Now, my question to you is, how would this person breathe? What kind of breathing would this person have? So it helps us appreciate what must be happening at the vibratory level of our being. In terms of light, is there more light with this is, if I call this the pattern A, and if I call this pattern C, we automatically see which one is more potent, which one has more light, and which one has more darkness. And we have the one in between, which has some degree of light, but then it still is a bit in the movement. It's very dynamic. All right. So if we want to understand this from the perspective of the gunas, we see that this is the sattva guna, this is the rajas, and this is the tamas. And you can automatically see what is happening at the various levels of that individual in terms of the physical body. How would it be across the three? What would be the emotional state across the three? What would be the psychological, the mental framework across the three? How would it then respond to the vibrations outside it? Because this whole thing is surrounded by different kinds of vibrations. Which vibration will have an impact on this? And these are things for us to try and understand, and we will look at it when we look at the concept of the gunas in greater detail later on. We will try and see how this impacts the way in which we are receiving information and disseminating information from our perspective. Okay, so here we see this entire thing. So that's the guna system. So as Prakriti enters into manifestation, we see that there is more and more of this entanglement that is happening. And from there, we have the different evolutes that come about. So when it comes to the individual, you have the quality of the sattva, which becomes the mind, because that was what offers the greatest clarity. Then it starts getting more and more dense as it becomes the senses of knowledge, the jnanendriyas, and then the senses of action, the karmendriyas, that followed by the panchatattvas, the faculty of each sense that is corresponding to a certain faculty, which in turn corresponds to the panchabhuta. So the pancha mahabhuta is the final gross form of this vibratory patterns which makes us who we are, and this connects to the whole Ayurveda principle. You remember when we talked of the fact that the human body is made of the 5 elements. So if somebody has more of, let's say, earth element, how will they look, how will they talk, how will they move, how will they think, versus somebody who has more air element in them. So the permutation and combination of the physiological Pancha Mahabhuta composition of the individual, the 5 elemental composition of the individual, determines a lot of their personality and their looks as well. And this is the basis of the whole Ayurveda system, where they then talk of the combination of these Panchabhutas as being the doshas, the Vata, Pitta, Kapha, the three doshas. So Kapha being earth, and Pitta being water and fire, and Vata being the air and space. So all of these together is what we are composed of. And if you look at it from that perspective, we see that whatever Ayurveda and whatever Sankhya talks about is really true, because it is happening bottom up. So how I understand it, I see that Vedanta, while it is a top-down approach, it says that everything is consciousness and that is the ultimate reality. And of course it is the ultimate reality, because everything is fundamentally energy. But then if you look at it bottom up, like the way Sankhya does it, so Sankhya looks at it bottom up, and we see it's the Panchabhuta upwards. So if I start with my body and then I keep zooming in, zooming in, zooming in, at one point I arrive at the Purusha consciousness. And what is the Purusha consciousness in the Sankhyan perspective? So if there is a vibratory being, so the vibratory being is what really starts off with Prakriti. So it's all vibration. And apparently there is no consciousness in that movement for the Sankhyan perspective, and therefore Prakriti is Jada. She's one and she's Jada. But if you think of it, that behind this vibratory pattern, there is a backdrop. That backdrop is Purusha. Again, the way I understand it, and I'm just sharing this if it makes sense for you also. So that Purusha is there, and it is when Purusha combines with Prakriti, that manifestation happens, and therefore we are conscious beings, and we get entangled in the processes of life, and which leads to sorrow, etc. So the way to start freeing ourselves of those sorrows and the sufferings are, how do you disengage again and retire into your Purusha perspective, and the creation can go on, but you are no longer participating in that. And that is the state of Kaivalya in the Sankhya concept. In Vedanta, it is basically just recognizing the fact that while we have this double lens, on one side you have the classical physics lens of seeing the world and all, but they say that forget all that, just go deep within and you will find that energy stuff, and that is what really is the transformative aspect of our life. And therefore, we are Aham Brahmasmi. That's the main truth that defines our real nature. Okay, so that is a Vedantic perspective, and that is one's freedom. Understanding that and acting from that basis makes us completely free. So this is the point that we see here, and therefore we have the spectrum of consciousness that we talk of. If I have to just add on here from the point of view of Parardha and Aparardha, so this would be the Aparardha. I'm just putting it as AP, and this is the Parardha. All right, for us to understand the two levels of the worlds. Now, next what happens is that we talk of the spectrum of consciousness here. So this is the spectrum of consciousness. And this spectrum of consciousness, we see that it has three states, avasthatrayam. Okay, so what are these three states? So for us in our active life, we are in the Jagrat. Then there is the phase of the dream state or the Swapna. And there is a phase of the deep sleep state, which is the Sushupti. Right? And we also know that there is a phase within us, or there is a stage within us which is beyond, which is Turiya. And the Turiya again ties in to the concept of, so I'll just write it here, Turiya. This is also the Sakshi, because Purusha is the Sakshi. Sakshi. And then we also have the Turiya, which puts us, I'll put a star here, all right, to indicate that this is similar to the Sakshi, which is also similar to the Brahman. So all these are linking up in a sense. So we have these three states of awareness, the absolute awareness, the dream state, and the Sushupti, which is the deeper nature within us of the Sushupti. And then we see in this case, this also determines our Prakriti. Okay, so that's our personality here. So there is the Prakriti. We have then the Swabhava. And we have the Swadharma. All right. And we see that the Prakriti and Swabhava are, I'll put a star here. The Prakriti and Swadharma are connected to this. They are related to the different gunas and what are they. And we also know that they are connected to, all of this is also connected to the two natures of the Daivi. So they are the Daivi Sampat and the Asuri Sampat. Okay, if you can see the cursor here. So the gunas on top there, you can see that the gunas are connected to this Daivi and Asuri Sampat, and they play a role in influencing each other. Okay, so if you have the Daivi Sampat, then would you be in the Sattva A, or would you be in the Tamas, or if you have the Asuri Sampat, then where would you be? So you see how they're all interrelated in some ways. And then we have the concept of the different varnas that we have. All right, so I will just put we have the concept here of these. The Swadharma ties into the concept of the Varna. All right, and the Varna, we have 4 of them. So what is your Swabhava, Swadharma, all of that? So we have the 4 of them here. So we've got the Brahmana, the Kshatriya, the Vaishya, and you have the Shudra. So now we have this confusion between Varna that is not equal to the concept of the Jati. Though practically it has become that, and it's not hard to imagine why it would have become that, because if somebody is born in a family, let's say you're born in a doctor's family, and you're constantly getting the impressions, the sanskaras of what it means to be in a hospital, and you're growing up with that atmosphere. There is a great chance that you will end up becoming a doctor, because that is what is in your genes, one, and that is what you have a propensity for. So this then connects to the entire concept of becoming. So we've just talked so far with who are we. The next question that becomes very important is, who do we become? But before that, I'd like to just take us through this entire thing, and you can recognize all that we've already studied there. So there are the 2 selves, the Jiva, the Atman, and the evolving self of the psychic being that Sri Aurobindo talks about. So just the Jiva is the small s self, Atman is the big S self. And then we have the multi-layered reality, therefore the spectrum of consciousness, the 2 schools, largely the 2 schools of Vedanta that talks of the one Brahman, and Avidya as the source of that, moving away from that Brahman. The 5 sheets of the Panchakosha, and how we can gradually understand that behind it all, we are this Brahman consciousness that has manifested itself within the materiality. And then we have, there, as I mentioned, we talk of the mind plus with Vijnana, and Anandamaya Kosha, which I consider as a mind plus plus. And then we have Sankhya and Ayurveda, where we have the 25 principles. So I've written one Purusha and one Prakriti, but actually it's many Purushas. Okay, so one in the sense of the dual principles that are there. So Purusha and Prakriti, but multiple Purushas is something that you have to remember. And then there is a concept of the 3 gunas. The combination of that creates the 13 evolutes or the Vikriti. We have then the Sakshi Bhava, all the way, this range from the Sakshi Bhava to the Pancha Mahabhuta. And then we talk to the 4 states, the 3 primary ones, or the Avasthatrayam and the witness self. The 3 that we've seen with the Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, and the Turiya, which is the 4th state. Then we talked of the 3 bodies. So this is something that we need to talk about a little more clearly. So when we have the Jagrat Avastha, so this is the active body, or the Sthula Sharira. So I'll mention it here. So this is the Sthula, or the gross body, which is defined by the external senses. Okay, and if you remember there, this was the Vaishwanara aspect. And then we have the Swapna, which is a Sukshma. So that's the Sukshma, or the subtle body, and this is connected to the inner senses and the impressions that are there. And then we had the Sushupti, which is connected to the causal body. Causal, or the Karana. Karana Sharira. Okay, so the Karana Sharira is the causal body. What is it? So therefore, in today's context, we look at the concepts of ideas like, the psychosomatic diseases. Where do these psychosomatic diseases happen? They take place in this Karana Sharira somewhere, because that is what is storing all the impressions of the individual at a certain level. And that is what carries on, and that is what decides what will happen from a very deep layer of our consciousness in impacting our lives. All right, so we have the Karana Sharira there. So the three bodies. And then we have the two personality, we have the concept of the personality. So Prakriti Swabhava and Swadharma. The two natures, the Daivi Sampat and the Asuri Sampat, the divine nature and the demonic nature, which have these qualities and vices respectively. Then the idea of the cosmic Purusha, whose head became the Brahmana, the arms became the Kshatriya, the procreatory part became the Vaishya, and the feet became the Shudra. And Sri Aurobindo talks of it as the necessity of integrating all four within one. And finally, we talked of the difference between the concept of jati and varna. Jati being specifically connected to one's temperament, and therefore if you give somebody with a certain temperament a certain job, chances of that job being better performed are higher than somebody who is just born in a certain context and is given a task but might not have the temperament to do so. So this is a very significant distinction, and it would be great the more we understand it and start implementing it in our lives, we can translate it into the realities of our society, because our society has got so anchored with this birth-based mixture with the, this hash that we've made with the concept of the varnas. So this is important to, in a sense, separate out a little bit to get clarity on that concept and regard jati as jati and varna as varna. These are very important ideas. All right, what next? We talk of the human becoming, and this is the context of life and action. So what happens here? So in this context, we see that there is the notion of the Vedic mystics, where the Vedic mystics are talking of four things that are happening, the four doctrines of the Vedic mystics. The first one is the fact that there is an involution and evolution process. So man has a certain degree of an imperfection in the process of the involution, and through evolution we are moving towards our perfections. Another important idea is that because each one is a unique experiment, we have different ways to arrive at that, which corresponds to the idea of the Swadharma, taking us back to the idea of Rita. There are the right. Each one has our right way of achieving that. So that is the path, or Ritasya Panthaha they call it. And then the idea that there is one underlying truth. Each one takes their respective paths, but there is one underlying truth which has many names, which is Ekam Sad Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. Then we looked at the ideas of the three images that the Vedas uses to depict this whole process of life. The first one was the yajna, or the sacrifice, the understanding that all of this is a grand exchange that is taking place, a cosmic and the individual. The cosmic is giving the individual is receiving and giving back to the cosmic. And this is a huge exchange that is taking place, and we need to become aware, because whom are we giving to? Which set of forces? Are we offering to the forces of light, the devas, or are we offering to the set of the darkness, the dasyus? Whom are we performing these offerings to? Because that is going to determine what is going to happen. It's the investments we are making. Investment to light and expansion, or investment to darkness and contraction. So where are we doing these offerings, and how are we doing it? By lighting the fire, the Agni, and then by adding the word of truth, the mantra, and finally by offering the delight of existence behind all the actions that we do. So that was the idea of the sacrifice of the yajna. Moving on to the idea of the battle. So the human being is a very central entity of this entire cosmic process of involution and evolution. It's only in the human being that this process is taking place. This entire cosmic game is playing out within only the human entity. So even if the gods want to evolve, they need to take a human birth in order to evolve. So we must absolutely not downplay or underestimate the importance that we play in the setting of the order and the setting of the balance and imbalance of creation. So depending on whom we are offering and whose side we are fighting the battle on, are we fighting with the devas, or are we fighting with the dasyus, the terrors, the dividers, the bargainers, or the forces of vastness, friendship, harmony, light, illuminations? And then the third image is that of a journey. So we are luckily going from lower heights to greater heights. It's a tough climb, as we all experience in our lives, but the climb it is, and the promises of reaching the summit someday, and that when we reach the summit, we will see the sun shining brightly again around us. So these are very important ideas that are there in the Vedas as the foundational concepts and the foundational realized experiences, the lived experiences of the rishis, who through the Vedas, through the Upanishads, through these great texts, informed the rest of the society about the whole play of consciousness, the whole play of creation, the Leela that is happening. Okay, so This is the grand context in which everything is unfolding. And therefore, what was it about action? So we saw the 4 varnas and the goals of life. So we had the goal of dharma, artha, kama, moksha, the 4 purusharthas. And we also talked of the chaturashramas or the 4 ashramas, which are the brahmacharya, the grihastha, the vanaprastha and the sannyasa, and how they are interconnected. Which stage of life had to be dedicated to which pursuit? So brahmacharya had to be dedicated to dharma. Then grihastha had to be dedicated to artha and kama, but on the basis of dharma, uttamam. And then we have the 3rd stage, which is the vanaprastha, post 50s, okay? Because it's 25 years, 25 years, 25 years, like that. So when you go to vanaprastha, the next generation has grown up. They have a very different set of life experiences. The whole era has changed potentially. So if parents at that time keep thinking that we know best, we have to keep telling, it's bound to create conflict. So the Shastras prescribe the fact of moving towards a very conscious retirement, of starting to contemplate about what was my life all about. So there is dharma that comes back as a goal, but dharma more in terms of swadharma. What was this entire process all about? And finally, the realization that nothing of all that we had chased after is going to be of any lasting value. So what is it of any lasting value? It's the ability to engage and yet be completely free. So action done in a very different way. And that's why we look at the 3 kinds of karma. So the first kind of karma is the prescribed actions. The second one is doing against the prescribed actions of vikarma. And the third one is akarma, in the state of sannyasa ideally, or it need not come at the stage of sannyasa, but at any stage of life, the more we know how to offer and do our action and stop being the doer based on our ego personality of who I think I am, the more one is able to become an instrument and do the work in the best way possible. And therefore, in order to arrive at that state of being able to do akarma in the midst of action, how do we achieve it? By understanding the relationship of what is the ideal, what is the satya behind things, what is the ideal execution, the rita, and which will give us the best result of brihat. Ideal vision, satya, ideal execution, rita, and ideal result, which will be brihat. So ritam became the central focus of the Bharatiya civilization. How do we know the right? How do we acquire that intelligence, the ritambhara prajna? And how do we acquire that consciousness, which is truth-based consciousness, Ritachit? And how do we start very, very practically from bottom-up approach? We try and do it through Viveka Buddhi. So invoke Viveka Buddhi. And what is Viveka Buddhi at every stage? So at every moment of our life, we are making decisions. So what should be the basis of that choice? As Yamaraj says in the Kathopanishads to Nachiketa, he says it should be on the basis of Shreyas and Preyas, knowing that which is good for oneself. Good not in terms of societal concepts of good, but that which is for my greater well-being and my greater good. Not just mine, but by it should also contribute to the greater welfare of society around me. And then we have the alternative, which is Preyas, which is basically just following that which is pleasurable and which might not necessarily lead to a greater good. All right. And as you know, the road of Shreyas is tough in the beginning. It's like climbing the mountain top, but promises a great result with the view and the greater perspectives that we will have. The second is Preyas, where you're just enjoying in the easy aspects of life, which will not lead us to any kind of growth or greater insights in life and with work. And then what do they prescribe in the very common way of understanding Shreyas, or very common way of understanding what is Viveka Buddhi? They talk of it as being situational intelligence, so that wisdom, the worldly wisdom, also could be regarded as the first step in understanding or acquiring Viveka Buddhi. So what does it do? It talks about desha, place, kala, time and patra. Who, when and to whom should one engage with, in what manner? This is an important idea. We talk of the 4 margas, which are the jnana marga. So how can we start acquiring this? Either by our intellect, the cognition aspect, or through our emotion, we can start getting these clarities. Bhakti, and then by karma, which is action. How do we perform actions in order to minimize the noises in our life? And Raja Yoga combines all 4 of them. We also have mantra yoga, which is coming from the tantra stream, and that is really about connecting us to the subtler vibratory structures of our being. And how do you change that? By the pronunciation of mantras. Then we have the two kinds of knowledge. So in the Indic civilization, they were very clear that in order to achieve this entirety of self in its expression in the world, abhyudaya, so the fullness of life and the fullness of the individual freedom of being, nishreyasa. What did they talk of there? They talked of two things. You need two kinds of knowledge. So there is the paravidya, the knowledge of the human instrument, and the knowledge of the engagement with everything of the world, aparavidya. So aparavidya is knowledge about reality, it's knowledge of words and forms, but paravidya is knowledge as reality. It's the lived understanding of that greater truths within ourselves. It's the knowledge of formless reality. And the necessity here was, in Vedic psychology, demands that we have a mastery of both to avoid ruin in the practical world. It was a very grounded, life-reinforcing kind of philosophy or a worldview. It was not a life-negating worldview by any standards, or we would never have had the prosperity that we did civilizationally. And therefore, the two vidyas, just to give you a little bit of the mantra itself. So it says, Dve vidye veditavye itiha sma yad brahma vido vadanti. So the brahma vida, those who have seen this largest Brahman perspective, they say that we must all have two kinds of knowledge. What are they? Parachaiva paracha. So paracha, aparacha. So the two of them. So what is apara? So it says tatra para rigvedo yajurveda samavedor tharva vedaha shiksha kalpo vyakaranam niruktam chando jyotisham iti. So what is it? So these are the four Vedas. It starts with that, the four Vedas and the 6 Vedangas that they have mentioned here. Okay, those are texts that assist to understand the Vedas. So this is all apara vidya. And this is quite a startling feature of the Indic civilization, that they realize that these texts are also telling us about Brahman. They don't give us direct knowledge of Brahman, which can only happen through direct experience by the individual. So that is atha para yaya tad aksharam adhigamyate. So what is para? That knowledge by which that aksharam, that Brahman conscious can be known directly. So as you see the translation, I've given you more of it. So just some characteristics of apara and paravidya. So aparavidya is scriptural and intellectual, whereas para is realizational. Apara is indirect knowledge, whereas para is direct knowledge. Aparavidya is object-based, and therefore you see when we're talking of psychology as an experimental-based psychology, where you make it entirely, science is an empirical phenomenon, versus on the other side you have paravidya, where it is about self-revelatory. It is about understanding the individual. So it's subjective knowledge of the self, but from very, very scientific aspects, because it is about looking at oneself through rigorous subjectivity. Apara is a means, whereas in para it is the end. Apara prepares the mind and para liberates the seeker. What are the fourfold qualifications of the sadhana chatushtayam that we have? So sadhana chatushtayam are the 4 essential qualifications of the psychological attitudes of a seeker or an adhikari that they must possess to study and understand Vedanta, or basically prepare them to become receivers of the Brahman knowledge. So what does it say? It says, Adau nitya vastu vivekaha parigamyate. So first is the enumerated discrimination between the real and the unreal. Next, Iha amutra phalabhoga viragas tad anantaram. What is the next one? Next comes aversion to the enjoyment of fruits of one's action here and thereafter. It's not that I will do whatever here so that later on I will enjoy fruits in heaven or somewhere else. No, it's giving up attachment to wanting the fruits of one's actions. Next, Shamadhi Shatka Sampattir. That's the third one. So it says next is the group of 6 attributes, calmness and the rest, and we'll look at it next. And followed by Mumukshutvam Sputam. Iti Sputam. So Mumukshutvam is the yearning for liberation. One has to want, that fire has to be lit in order to want to be free of these entanglements. If there is a complete enjoyment in the entanglements, then there is no way out of it. Indian psychology says that one has to want initially, that one has to light that inner fire, to want to bring light in the darkness. Triple transformation. So what are the sadhana chatushtayam? So the sadhana chatushtayam are viveka or discretion, the ability to distinguish between what is nitya and anitya, the Brahman and the ephemeral world. What is vairagya or the dispassion? between Iha Amutra Phala Bhoga Viraga. It says dispassion or detachment towards worldly sensory pleasures. And then you have Samadamadi Shatka Sampatti. What are these mental disciplines? So Shama is mind control, Dhamma is sense control, Uparati is withdrawal from distractions, Titiksha is endurance, Shraddha is faith, and Samadhana is concentration. I think if one just looks at each one of these from a point of view of psychology and see how they offer us a very systematic way in achieving greater freedom from the entanglements, which is the goal of yogic approach to self-knowledge, we would be able to find very interesting things to study. And then, of course, finally, mumukshutva is that which is the intense longing for liberation. So what is the summary and the centrality of the mind here? We see that there is an importance of the mind. A person is a composite of consciousness, mind and body. When mind occupies a central and pivotal position, connecting consciousness at one end and body at the other in a linear relationship. And this is not triangular. We have body at the one end, mind, and then consciousness. And mind is the link principle. The goal of Indian psychology is to help raise humans to the higher level and of being towards excellence in knowing, feeling and doing. Traditionally, yoga traditions have talked about moving progressively away from body-centeredness, moksha, with greater focus on realizing consciousness as such as a goal. Because once you have that, you need not come into Punarjanma. You're liberated from the bondages of physical nature. But integral yoga, Sri Aurobindo offers a very alternative perspective, and this is in line with the Vedic aspiration, which talks of the seven-headed truth and the seven waters, and Sri Aurobindo's notion of the triple transformation. So what does Sri Aurobindo talk of this evolutionary premise where man is transitional, the seven-headed truth in the seven waters? So each of these seven worlds has behind it, we have seen, behind it there is the truth of the Brahman. But in manifestation, it is there. So here, like I said, it's dense matter. Here it is a little less dense. Here it is a little less dense. That is the connecting principle between the two worlds. And then we have the Anandamaya or the cosmic universal aspects. So the seven-headed truth in the seven waters implies knowing the characteristics, the free characteristics of the Brahman within each of those levels. Okay, where one is completely free. All right, one is completely manifested that. And that also ties in with Sri Aurobindo's concept of the three transformations, where the first one is the transformation of the psychic transformation. We understand that I am not this ego-bound self. There is this movement of the psychic within me. I connect with that and allow that to guide me. Once that happens, then we connect to the spiritual transformation, or you completely surrender and allow the higher forces to guide one's life. And then finally comes the seven-headed waters, the seven-headed truth in the seven waters. Seven waters represent the different levels of consciousness. So we allow that transformation to work out within the body. So the body itself becomes divine, life becomes divine, because every aspect is filled with the consciousness of Brahman within it. And this is in line very much with the mantra from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritangamaya. It's not about going from one to the other, but going to the truth of the untruth, going to the light of the darkness, and going to the immortality of death. It's not just about going from one state, so I have known that I am my Brahman and reject the body. No. It's about trying to discover immortality within the material of death itself. So within this body eventually as a potential. So this idea of seeking for immortality in the mortal frame has been very beautifully presented by Sri Aurobindo in his epic work, The Savitri. Savitri is based on the famous story of Savitri and Satyavan, where she is married to him. When she decides that he's the husband of her choice, then Narada tells her that it's a bad idea because he's destined to die within 1 year of their marriage. But she's convinced and she goes to live with him in the forest. On that fateful day, she accompanies him into the forest to collect wood, and he falls there with the bite of a snake. Yamraj himself comes to collect the soul, and Savitri starts accompanying him. But in the process, he realizes that she's so brilliant that he grants her boons. He says, other than the life of your husband, ask for anything. So then she asks, the first boon that she asks is the restoration of the eyesight and the kingdom for her father-in-law Dyumatsena. The second one is the continuation of the lineage of her father, Ashwapati, through 100 sons. And finally, she says, let me be the mother of several children as well. And when she says that, and Yamraj says, okay, he realizes that it's not possible without Satyavan. And he's forced to give back Satyavan. So stories like these are legends and symbols of the victory of the Divine Mother over the so-called fatality of death as well. And the story of love conquering death. So in this particular passage, which is my favorite, I'll read it out to you. Savitri is having a conversation with death. And he's trying to convince her that, why do you want to take the soul back? Because either way, he's going to die again. And then there will be no use of just trying to prolong his life. Then Savitri finally says that, do you know who I am? I am the Divine Mother, and even you exist because I have allowed you to exist. Now move aside, because I reclaim the soul and the immortality within it. So she says, how sayest thou truth can never light the human mind, and bliss can never invade the mortal's heart, or God descend into the world he made? If in the meaningless void creation arose, if in the meaningless void creation rose, if from a bodiless force matter was born, if life could climb in the unconscious tree, if green delight break into emerald leaves, and its laughter of beauty blossom in the flower, if sense could wake in tissue, nerve and cell, and thought seize the grey matter of the brain, and soul peep from the secrecy through the flesh, how shall the nameless light not leap on men, and unknown powers emerge from nature's sleep? Even now hints of a luminous star-like, truth-like stars. Even now hints of a luminous truth-like stars arise in the mind-moon splendor of ignorance. Even now the deathless lover's touch we feel. If the chamber's door is even a little ajar, what then can hinder God from stealing in? Or who forbid his kiss on the sleeping soul? Already God is near, the truth is closed. Already God is near, the truth is close. Because the dark atheist body knows him not, must the sage deny the light, the seer his soul? And then this important passage where she says, I am not bound by thought nor sense or shape. I live in the glory of the infinite. I am near the nameless and unknowable. The ineffable is now my household mate. But standing on eternity's luminous brink, I have discovered that the world was he. I have met spirit with spirit, self with self. But I have loved too the body of my God. I have pursued him in his earthly form. A lonely freedom cannot satisfy a heart that has grown one with every heart. I am a deputy of the aspiring world. My spirit's liberty I ask for all. So we come back to the centrality of the mind in Indian psychology, where it says that it is a soul of the existential anguish. It is the necessary resource to liberate the person from that anguish, enabling to achieve the sought-after state of perfection and self-realization of moksha, kaivalya or apavarga. And this can happen through complete surrender. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi yukttvaivam atmanam mat parayanaha. Sri Krishna says, become my-minded, my lover and adorer, a sacrificer to me. Bow thyself to me. Thus, united with me in the self, thou shalt come to me, having me as thy supreme goal. Therefore, we come back to the idea of where do we start? We need to mind our mind. There's some heterogeneous ideas of the mind, and you see how the concept of the mind also evolved. There is no homogeneity in the concept. And classical Indian philosophy has undergone a variety of interpretations, and that reflect an ontological position of concerned thinkers in the changing socio-cultural context. And I will allow you to look at these differences, and we'll be studying them as we move ahead as well. So what's the exercise? Try and personalize this entire content and context for your life story. Try and map your life on the dimensions of your being and becoming, and to take stock of your personal journey. You can do an objective case study of your own psychophysiological anatomy or PAN and its relational features, and do it with as much sincerity as you can. Here are some scales that you can use if you want to have more empirical basis for getting clarity on your own nature and personality. Glossary of terms for you. References. Some food for thought for you from Lao Tzu. He says, watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. So we start with watching our thoughts. So mind is the gap and mind will be the filler. So we will focus our attention on that. With these words, I'll allow you to do the exercise, do that mapping, and look forward to continuing discussion on the mind and discovering how different schools have talked about it. Dhanyavada and see you soon.